Hello, this is Professor Angel, and I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the different parts of a narrative. And obviously the reason we are reviewing this week is because you are beginning to write your narrative essay. So it is a good idea to kind of think about and talk about the different parts of a story as you prepare to write your own. So if you take a look at what I have on the screen here, you'll see a little gentleman that appears to be ascending a mountain and going back down it again. And this is kind of an accurate depiction of really what a story is. A story is all about kind of taking a journey with the author, and so this kind of really shows you that. But let's talk about the different parts and elements of a story. So the first thing we can talk about is plot. And plot is just a very kind of overall general term for what is happening in a story, or the sequence of the events that make that story up. All right, so that's what you're dealing with when you hear the word plot. The first term to be aware of when we're dealing with the parts of a narrative is the exposition. And the exposition is just a fancy word for the beginning. Okay, and basically this is where your characters are introduced, this is when your setting is introduced, and also when your conflict is introduced. Now, conflict is really kind of what the story is going to be about, what the issues are, what the problems are. And so all of these things are introduced at the beginning of the story. And it's very important to create a solid exposition. Your audience needs to know who your characters are and what they're about before you actually start on the next element, which is in fact the rising action. And during the rising action part, this is when the conflicts and the whole story really starts to develop. And if you develop this correctly and you put a lot of effort into it so your reader feels as though they know your characters and they can envision the scenes, they will be much more, they will be much more ready to kind of suspend disbelief and go along with you on the story, with the story. So after rising action, usually what's going to end up happening is things are all going to kind of come to a culmination, or they're going to come to the most exciting part of the story, which is obviously called the climax. And this is also considered to be a pivotal moment, a moment when things can go one way or things can go another way. So the climax is a result of the rising action. Now, will all of your stories have like some crazy, climax? Maybe not. Maybe it'll be something much more, subdued. Maybe a character will realize something. Maybe some kind of achievement will be made. It's just really going to kind of depend on the content of the story. But the most important thing to kind of keep in mind with the climax is this is when things are coming to, the most exciting or pivotal moment in a story. Now, after the climax, obviously, you can see that, where are you going to go from here? Well, you see it's falling action. That's because at that point, all loose ends of the plot are tied up, the conflicts and climax are all taken care of. You really kind of have a good idea of how the story is going to end. And again, how will this play out? Well, it all depends on the content of the story that in fact you'll be writing. Now the final part is the resolution. And this is just another fancy word. This word is just for the end, okay? The story comes to a reasonable ending. And how you would end your story? Well, it would just really depend again on the content. Now, many students have pointed out to me in the past that, Mrs. Angel, this is kind of a old-fashioned way to have a plot diagrammed. And the truth is I couldn't agree with you more. Because many stories follow different patterns than what you've just seen. If you think about movies that you've seen, and we often talk about the movie Pulp Fiction in my classes, a lot of things do not follow this precise diagram. But it is a way to kind of think of the different elements of a lot of different stories that you've read or you've seen on TV, or you've seen it on movies. In movies. But this is definitely a good way to think about the parts of a narrative. So this week, you're asked now to go forward and kind of look around online and find a quote that you think speaks to you. You're then asked to take that quote and create a story that shows its meaning. Now remember, your narrative is not about you explaining the meaning of the quote, and it shouldn't be, a personal story. It should be a fictional story that explains the meaning of a quote. And to that end, I'm going to give you an example. For instance, if I chose the quote, "A ship is safe in the harbor, but that's not what a ship is meant for," and I wanted to write a story or create a story that would illustrate the meaning, I would kind of do a little bit of brainstorming and I'd come up with some ideas, and maybe I would write a story about a girl named Darla who wanted to run a marathon. She was a little nervous and didn't know if she could do it, but she dared. She dared to do it. Now Darla knew it would be safe and it would be probably easier for her not to try to do something that might injure her or might, be something that she failed at. However, she took the chance. Now this illustrates the meaning of that quote because the quote in essence means, you know what? Taking chances means that you're safe, but that's not what life is. Life is taking chances. All right, so the story that I just gave you really kind of illustrates the meaning of it. So what you need to do now is go forward and make sure you pick that quote. And as you're brainstorming and as you're thinking about your story, be sure that you're thinking about the exposition, where the story is going to take place, who these people are. Make sure you're thinking about what the conflict is. For instance, in my story, the conflict would be whether or not Darla is going to run the race, whether or not she will be successful, and so on. Okay? And then I want to think about what my climax would be. And I think probably in that story, maybe it would be when Darla crossed the finish line. But you determine what your story will be and what your climax will be. All right? And these are the parts of a narrative. Make sure you're aware of them. Not only will we use this information, by the way, for the narrative that you're writing, but we will also use it when we are mapping plots for several of the different narratives you're asked to read for this week. Okay? And have a lovely day.